Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I'm thankful that I have the opportunity to present the evaluation of pelvic floor muscle activity during running in continent and incontinent women. Impact activities like running are known to elicit the symptoms of stress urinary incontinence. A high prevalence of 41% has been found in young, physically fit females and in female athletes. But data about involuntary reflexive activity of the pelvic floor muscles during the impact loads of running, as example, are still inadequate. Therefore, the aim of this study was to investigate and compare pelvic floor muscle activity in continent and incontinent women during running at 3 different speeds. We performed a surface electromyography with a tripolar vaginal probe that can be seen on these pictures here. And we recorded pelvic floor muscle activity during running on a treadmill during 10 seconds at the speeds 7, 11, and 15 kilometers per hour. Before I highlight some of the results of the studies, I would like to introduce you to this figure. So on the y-axis, you can see the 3 different speeds, and you can see how our timeline was parameterized into 6 time intervals with 30 milliseconds each, starting 30 milliseconds prior to heel strike indicated by the red arrow, and 5 time intervals after heel strike, going up to 150 milliseconds. On the y-axis, you can see the values of our normalized EMG. So first of all, it can be said that pre-activity and reflex activity patterns have been found. The pre-activity in the time interval 30 milliseconds prior to heel strike has been very high and has been significantly different to most of the time intervals for reflex activity that followed after heel strike. No statistically significant differences between the continent and incontinent women could be found. Mean EMG activity was significantly different to the pelvic floor muscle onset threshold activity that we called ON. This onset threshold activity can be seen, it's indicated with a yellow and blue line here at the bottom at about 40% MVC. So the pelvic floor muscles have been active all the time. The mean EMG increased significantly with speed, as can be seen here with these circles. So coming to a conclusion, it can be said that running appears to trigger pre-activation before and reflex activation after heel strike. Running-like exercise, like making a few steps, may be a potential training stimulus. Therefore, running-like stimuli may serve as a beneficial complement to a training rationale, leading to reflex activity of the pelvic floor muscles.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. Are there questions from the floor? Please state your name and where you're from.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Chantal Dumoulin from Montreal, Canada. I was just wondering about the limitation of your study. Could you tell us more about limitation of EMG recording?
Well, there's the limitation of crosstalk, for example, that can't be excluded completely. We had screened for plausibility and hoped that all the motion artifact has been not so big. There is a limitation in that we had a standardized striking pattern. We asked the participants to use heel strike in order to have a standardization, though that could have been a bias if some women naturally would not have used to use heel strike rather than forefoot patterns. And there are a lot of limitations in EMG, but we were interested into getting more information about the dynamic function of the pelvic floor, and so we did the best that we could.
Yeah. I'm just wondering about the fact that if you increase speed, you might be increasing the possibility at the same time of the crosstalk. And I would be very careful with the conclusion of the study.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Karibu, Oslo, Norway. Thank you for a very interesting and important study. I'm just worried about the conclusion, because the fact that women who are exercising a lot, they also leak a lot, and you refer to one of our studies on that. So how can you explain that this may be a training effect?
We do not understand our conclusion like the recommendation for women go on a running mile for several kilometers. We understand just these outcomes of a very exploratory, observative study as a trigger. So perhaps just some steps having this reflexive impact where the pelvic floor muscle have to counteract in some way, perhaps that could be a trigger in order to have a training rationale that is complemented by the involuntary exercises and involuntary activity that is so needed in the pelvic floor muscle rehabilitation.
But that would be for sedentary women, because those who are already running, they are leaking, so they cannot run more to have this effect, can they?
You know, that is the controversial discussion where you contributed a lot, and I appreciated all your contributions to that topic. The manifestation of stress urinary incontinence during the impact of running does not necessarily explain all the pathomechanics. And so perhaps we should just flip the coin and see the other side, that just a few running-like stimuli may have a potential for an additional training rationale.
I still don't buy it, because they are leaking. They are leaking when they're
perhaps, you know, yeah. First of all, I have to say that the women that participated in our study have not been leaking. There was no incontinence that happened. And also, probably the women that participated in our study have been only very mild being affected by incontinence. But the fact that I just lost the thread. Can you just...
Yeah, thank you for a nice presentation. I don't have time for a question anymore, but I have some questions, but I'll look you up after the session.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My name is Jeroen Vorm from the Netherlands.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.